Littoral combat ships, the U.S. Navy's $22 billion vessels that don't work, by Simon Whistler over at Megaprojects. I love how I pulled this up and immediately chat's response was, oh no, this jank. I have not heard about this. I'm ready for this. I'm so ready to see the absolute jank that this is.
Imagine building dozens of transformational warships only to discover they transform mostly into headaches. That's the Littoral combat ship story, a promise of swap-in missions, tiny crews, and high-speed dash, undone by fragile machinery, cancelled capabilities, and early retirements that read like apologies. It wasn't just teething problems, it was a design philosophy that asked small ships to do big jobs cheaply and indefinitely. The result? A fleet the Navy is trimming even as new hulls arrive, with the few that prove their worth quietly reassigned to the one job that they can still do well. If there's a silver lining, it's this. The brass have learned the next act is not another science project, but a back-to-basics frigate, the Constellation class, built to fight, last, and actually show up when the shooting starts. And just how exactly did we get from glossy brochure to strategic retreat? Well, let's find out. Today's video.
Before we get into the sponsor, military brass and learning, I don't think is necessarily a sentence that goes together. From a number of videos, military brass and learning, not necessarily copacetic, sympathetic with each other, right?
Videos brought to you by our friends over at Squarespace, the website platform that makes building an online presence feel like less of a chore and, more like something that you'll actually finish, which is nice, isn't it? Look, I use Squarespace to build my own personal website back maybe 5 years ago with Squarespace, and it was super easy. And now it's even easier because they have something called Blueprint AI, which basically handles all of the heavy lifting even more than they did before. You just give it a few inputs, your goals, your industry, whatever you like, and it spits out a tailored layout that actually looks fantastic. Plus, the design tools are solid and there's no coding. It's all just drag and drop. You adjust and you're done. Plus, there's built-in email campaigns, which are surprisingly robust. You can set up automations that don't feel like spam, and they will help people come back to your website. Plus, they've got fantastic analytics, so you can see what people are doing on your site, which is useful. Head to squarespace.com/mega for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, use the offer code MEGAPROJECTS to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or a domain. And now back to today's episode.
I think my audio driver is committing Sudoku. I can't tell if there's a high-pitch ringing because it's the ad or if it's my audio driver. I would give that a 9. I think that the audio was pretty consistent. So if we start, it was honestly a really quick ad. I hardly registered the ad, if I'm being honest. About 56, it was about a minute. It felt like 30 seconds, even though it was around 60. I think that it flowed together very well. I think it was very clean, very concise. Presentation was good. Audio was good. I'd say minus it might be his mic. It might be his mic. I don't know. I can't confirm or deny if it's his mic or not. If the audio was a little more, warm, a little more flush, doesn't feel like I was having tinnitus. Ultimately, I think it was very good. I think it's a 9 out of 10. I think that he hit all the right points. The talking points were great. The new feature, the AI feature he mentioned, very, very good. I give it a 9 out of 10. Constellation class just got canceled because the DoD kept changing the requirements. So look forward to seeing that on Megaprojects soon. I also have a video suggestion if you want more sooner. Let's see how the Megaprojects videos do, because I like doing stuff like this, but they definitely take a while.
The dream. At the turn of the millennium, the strategic planners of the US Navy were giving thought to the future and confronting a most uncomfortable thought. What if their hulking destroyers and cruisers, then the mainstay of the fleet, just weren't the right vessels for the next war? The Pentagon's 2001 Quadrennial Defense Review laid it out in black and white. The Navy needed ships that could slip into the shadows, fight swarming speedboats, sniff out submarines hiding in the littorals, and sweep mines from the sea lanes. Put simply, the Blue Water Fleet had to find a way to fight brown water wars. Enter the Littoral combat ship, or LCS as we'll call it herein, a supposed revolution in naval warfare that was going to do all of that very happily indeed. Admiral Vern Clark, then Chief of Naval Operations, sold it with evangelical zeal. His vision, called Sea Power 21, was all about speed, agility, and a new buzzword for the era: modularity. Basically, instead of having one big multi-role warship, you'd get a core C-frame that could swap out plug-and-play mission packages, most of the utility, but in a fraction of the size. 1 week.
Honestly, I think he's onto something, though. Like, we've talked about the Stoner, his AR, right? How the modularity is a big selling point on that. I think he's onto something here. You have your core frame, and you're supposed to tailor it to whatever your missing destination is. I think, unfortunately, at its core, especially with modern military right to repair, that kind of goes out the window because, you know, you can be in an active war zone and have to call your military contractor, hey, I need to fix this tank. I need to fix this. Well, sorry, but we can't give you the blueprint on that. It's going to take us X amount of business days to get someone out there. Oh, and make, holidays, weekends, we don't count those, right? I think when we talk about military right to repair, that concept of the modularity just goes out the window. So that's my own personal view on that. But even military right to repair aside, modularity is great, but it has to be enacted correctly. If the core is rotten, the whole concept is rotten. The Stoner rifle, if that was a rotten rifle, do you think it would see as much as kind of views as it gets, right? Would it be looked on as fondly if it was a garbage platform that was all polymer, right? Sure, it's got the modularity, but a bad platform is a bad platform. That's kind of what I'm arguing.
It could be hunting mines, the next it could be chasing subs, the next blasting pirate skiffs, and so on and so forth. And on paper, it sounded brilliant. In glossy brochures and contractor pitches, the ships were sold as being impossibly fast, topping 40 knots, nigh unheard of for a normal surface combatant, with such speeds at all normally being the preserve of hyper-specialized hovercrafts and hydrofoils. Mm-hmm. Their shallow draft would also mean that they could enter shallow harbors and navigate depthless rivers, the kinds that even a somewhat modestly sized Burke-class destroyer couldn't even think about tackling. Their
What's a hydrofoil? I've never heard of those.
crew would be tiny too, a mere 40 to 50 sailors in all who would be more than capable of operating the ship thanks to a near sci-fi level of automation. Mm-hmm. Their deployments were to be similarly radical too. You know, the normal way of doing things where a sailor is posted to a ship for an extended period of time and that's kind of it? Well, the LCS was going to use a revolutionary new concept, the 3-2-1 crewing model, which would mean that 3 rotating crews would operate 2 LCS ships, keeping one continuously deployed for 16-month rotations.
Yeah, it's going to be logistics that kills this, isn't it? Both from a crewing standpoint and actual outfitting packages. It's going to be a logistics nightmare, isn't it? See, I say this as someone who hates the 277 Fury round and the SIG Fury. I hate that thing, dude. It's a logistical nightmare that doesn't need to exist. Because we already have 5.56 and other NATO standardized rounds, thus introducing a proprietary round from scratch. It's just a logistical nightmare.
In theory, this meant that the Navy could keep more hulls at sea, 50% at any one time by period estimations, and use fewer sailors while doing it, squeezing maximum fleet presence out of a finite budget. Every ambition has its skeptics though, and the LCS absolutely was no different. Mm-hmm. For example, as early as 2001, one Lieutenant John Baggett, in his naval postgraduate school thesis titled Logistical Analysis of the Littoral Combat Ship, LCS, operating independently in the Pacific, was warning that the whole idea might be running ahead of the hard physics of endurance and logistics. His spreadsheet suggested the sleek little C-frames would guzzle fuel like sports cars when pushed to high speed, and that the much-touted 1,500 nautical miles at sprint promise that was being thrown around back then was basically just a fantasy. Such warnings were ignored, however, and so the Navy plowed on ahead. 2 competing designs were ordered: Lockheed Martin's steel monohull Freedom class and Austal USA's all-aluminium Trimaran Independence class. Both looked futuristic and were supposed to be cheap and quick to build. So cheap and quick to build, in fact, that they were considered basically nearly disposable. The dream was a seductive one then. Small ships swarming the littorals, trading blows with pirates, submarines, and mines, while the carriers and destroyers stayed safely offshore. What a shame it was then that dream turned into a whole massive nightmare.
I feel really bad for the people who are going to have to work on these. So, Messer comments in chat clarifying what a hydrofoil is. There's a boat with a spoil beneath the hull as it picks up speed. The foil forces the hull out of the water, reducing the effect of ocean, adding drag. Interesting. That's actually really cool. They go so fast, they lift off the surface and are anchored by a massive underwater spoiler. Ah, that's cute. Raven clarifies, oddly enough, no, it's not a logistical thing. It's the material that they're made out of. Problem with modular designs is that they are build ideas to be modular. Problem with the Stoner was that it was far more expensive and complex to produce, able to do every role, making it worse at everything. Good example being the LMG configuration. Had a gaping hole that was the magazine well. Standard AR configuration was heavier than it needed to be. So modularity is definitely one of those things that could definitely be looked at. Like, I mean, there are entire theses, plural, that could be made on modularity and its effectiveness and how it affects logistics, right? People way, way smarter than I am who could really be looking into this in regards to, is it efficient to make things modular, or is build to order going to be the better business model? And even then, it's entirely possible that it depends on the industry, right? Where modularity works for certain industries, where build to order works for other industries. It really depends, I think.
The build. But before we get into that, let's build some history. And it's nothing if not a swift history. The LCS program was only initiated on the 1st of November 2001 when the Navy announced that it was replacing the cancelled DD-21 destroyer project with a new Future Surface Combatant program, a family of 3 ships: the DDX destroyer, later the Zumwalt class, the CGX cruiser, later cancelled, and of course, the LCS. And come May 2004, the money was already being put down and lights were being lit up green as both Lockheed Martin and Austal were told to get on with proper development.
Literally never heard of Austal. That's literally the first time I'm ever hearing of them.
The Navy was actually being quite sensible too, because at this point, both the Independence and Freedom classes were only being taken to the prototype stage, 2 radically different visions that were to prove themselves at sea, with that which was judged the lesser of the two being culled and the winner then being pushed through to full serial production. As per a 2019 Congressional Research Service report from one Ronald O'Rourke, Lockheed Martin's Freedom class was the more conventional of the two. A semi-planing steel monohull with an aluminium superstructure, it looked like a sleeker cousin of the Navy's existing frigates. At 378 feet long with a width of 57 feet, it displaced around 3,400 tons and could push 47 knots thanks to a combined diesel and gas turbine plant. The design also emphasized compactness and high sprint speed, with its slimmer hull form meant to cut through the water like a speedboat. But that came with trade-offs: less deck space, tighter internal volume, and a propulsion system that demanded complex gearing to juggle between turbines and diesels. Austal's Independence class, by contrast, looked modern, to say the least.
Yeah.
A 418-foot-long, all-aluminium trimaran, it spread its weight across 3 slender hulls, giving it a massive 104-foot width. That also created an enormous flight deck, the largest ever put on a US non-aircraft carrier surface combatant, in fact, and a cavernous mission bay beneath for vehicles, containers, or unmanned systems. The trimaran hull also offered stability at high speeds and in rough seas, but the aluminium construction, soft and squishy as it is when compared to steel, raised questions about survivability, especially under fire. Top speed.
So I actually don't know this. So my armor for, SCA purposes, right? The armor set you've often seen me wear in photos I'll post, right? The red and white one. That's steel. The step up from that is aluminum. So I'm trying, though, as I understand it, I think aluminum is a little weird to treat correctly, but I think it has like half the weight and the same strength as steel. But I don't know how that, like on a micro scale, yeah. Like if I'm hitting somebody with a sword, right? Sure, that's going to eat the impact, right? But if we're talking about an actual vessel or an actual vehicle, I don't know how that necessarily works. Not the same strength as steel. At least we'll stop anything short of GPMGs. Maybe. I don't know how aluminum really scales up. If I wanted to get better quote unquote armor, I would be going aluminum because, okay, even if it's not the same strength as steel, I guess it's a replacement and it's also about half the weight. But then again, I also don't know. I'm perfectly fine with my steel armor set. It's heavy and I have to condition myself to it. But I'm trying to utilize what I've experienced and try to scale it up to see why it would versus wouldn't work. It's lower weight but thicker, I guess. We'll see how it pans out.
However, it was down as compared to a Freedom class, with an Independence maxing out at 44 knots. So, which design ended up emerging as the victor? You no doubt want to know, and the answer to that
Neither
is yes. The first Freedom class, a class leader of the same name, was launched in 2006 and commissioned in 2008, with the first Independence class, again a class leader of the same name, came a while later, not being launched until 2008 and finally getting commissioned in 2010. Both were delivered late, and both had plenty of gremlins in their systems. But worst of all, both were way over budget, with the Government Accountability Office stating that early ships of both classes came in at around the $500 million kind of mark. And that's in then dollars, not today's dollars. And that was compared to an original estimate of around $220 million each. Oh, and those figures also don't include the cost of procuring those fancy mission modules either. So they'll be expensive. So why did the Navy then keep building them? Well, in 3 words: politics, jobs, and momentum. Technically 4 words if you count the "and" there, George, who wrote today's script. Basically, instead of picking a winner, as had been the original plan, the politicians leaned on the service to keep both variants alive. That meant doubling the overhead, 2 different training pipelines, 2 different supply chains, 2 different logistics tails. Senator Richard Shelby of Alabama, never shy about scoring a win for his home state, which built the Independence, was instrumental in pushing the so-called dual-buy arrangement that would ensure work was sent his constituents' way. And as journalist Megan Rose of ProPublica later reported, what started as a contest between 2 shipyards thus became a permanent compromise, one that guaranteed twice as many contracts, but twice as many headaches.
I mean, this feels odd, right? Like, well, who's the winner? Yes. And you kind of lock yourself into 2 contracts? I don't know how contractual obligations work. This feels expensive.
And in the same spirit, they also committed far too quickly. The first block buy contracts were awarded in 2010 for 20 ships, 10 of each class. That locked in billions of dollars before a single LCS had even proven itself operationally. By 2015, then Defense Secretary Ash Carter saw sense and had the program capped at 40 hulls, down from the original plan for 55. But even that proved optimistic. When all was said and done, and the final tallies were made, 35 LCSs were authorized in all, still far more than many felt was wise. They ended up being split roughly evenly, 17 Freedoms and 18 Independences, and the last ships are only just trickling into service now, almost 2 decades after the program began, with the final ship, Pierre, an Independence variant, having launched in August 2024 and still awaiting her commissioning. Billions spent, decades invested, and all for a fleet of ships that were meant to redefine littoral warfare, but ended up being written off as total failures.
So how does that work? Like, let's say the US government decides to go, hey, we need to contract the thing, and then the thing underperforms and doesn't meet market. Like, is it breach of contract? Can you just say no? Because that is a lot of tax dollars going into something that just doesn't seem to work, right? Like, we've seen that it's the economics Punnett Square. I don't remember which economist presented it, right? But like, in terms of spending money, you spending your own money, you spending someone else's money, someone else spending your money, and someone else spending someone else's money, from first to last, the cares decrease, right? So you spending your own money, you care a lot about it. You spending someone else's money, okay, you're going to care a little bit, right? Someone else spending your money might not care as much, and someone else spending someone else's money, why should they care? It's someone else's money. It's not their problem, right? I feel like that just goes, that's the economic rabbit hole part of this, right? But like, I guess it does depend. I guess it depends if this worked, if this is an outright failure, if like, that's why we're watching this. Like, what didn't work about it, and was there at least a purpose they got out of it?
The reality. And now we get to the crux of the matter, because why were they such failures exactly? Well, cost, as we have already seen, was certainly a part of it, but there's far more to it than just that, because it ain't like the US military is averse to a cost overrun so long as whatever soaked up all of that capital delivers some really, really good results. The LCS, however, didn't even do that, because put simply, they just don't work. Their reliability is absolutely bloody atrocious. Take the Milwaukee, the third Freedom class build, for instance. She had been commissioned with pomp in November 2015, and then 3 weeks later, she was dead in the water off Virginia, crippled by a catastrophic combining gear failure, that being a bit of machinery that combines the output of the ship's gas turbines and its diesel engines, thus enabling those big speeds. As Megan Rose put it after interviewing Milwaukee's crew, quote, "If the Milwaukee were a brand new car, this would be the equivalent of stalling on its way out of the dealership."
You know, I hear a lot of people talking about how obviously manufacturing moving overseas, everything being made cheaper. But this is, as far as I'm aware, American made, and I've heard nobody mention these ships at all in any of their conversations. This is wild.
At least they could fix that problem, though. Surely. Sure, it cost a few quid, but then at least they'd get a productive service line out of them, right? Well, wrong, because as Admiral Mike Gilday, the Chief of Naval Operations, put in 2021 when speaking to the press, quoting him here, "The issue with the combining gear is probably the most challenging engineering problem that we've seen on any class of ship since I've been in the Navy." Specifics on why it was so challenging were given by Rear Admiral Casey Moten that same year, quoting him. "It's a complex mechanism in the gear itself, so just the forensics that had to be done by the team to determine where the failure occurred, specifically in the design why the failure occurred, to be confident that had been the root cause, to look at a modification to the gear that would prevent those root causes in the future, which is a difficult thing to do on an existing gear, and then to ensure that that fix allows full operation and allows the ship to do what it's supposed to do. That entire technical effort was complex," is the best word for it.
Which is only going to be compounded by modern military right to repair culture, right? Because you're going to need to call the contractor, you're going to need to call whoever's supposed to service this, and they're going to have to figure it out, they're going to have to solve it. Meanwhile, you're left without a boat that you bought. You're left with a lemon for all intents and purposes.
That dude speaks in one long sentence.
Yeah.
Despite claims to the contrary from Lockheed Martin, Milwaukee's combining gear issues were not a one-off and were not fixed in later vessels. Fort Worth's combining gear, for example, broke in Singapore in January 2016. Littlerock's broke on a maiden deployment in March 2020, and Detroit's broke in the Caribbean in November 2020. And that's just one problem on one of the classes. There's more still. For the Independences, their fancy water jet propulsion systems, which work by drawing in water and forcefully expelling it through a nozzle in the stern, turned out to be temperamental. For example, Canado's broke down outright during a 2016 Western Pacific cruise after repeated minor failures, and she was forced to limp back to Hawaii instead of showing the flag in Asia. Jackson's went the same year during a full-stop shock trial, never reaching the point of total failure, but repeatedly bringing her to a halt. Montgomery proved particularly unlucky, as on one single day in September 2016, during a shakedown, her water jets failed, and she had an engine fail. But going back to the Freedoms, because when their combining gears were chewing themselves to bit, the engines hooked up to them were also giving no end of problems. For example, Freedom herself suffered a total power loss in July 2013 during a Singapore deployment. She also lost her number 2 diesel engine in July 2016 after seawater somehow entered her lube oil system.
Okay.
Oh, we can't forget the Independence's fragile hulls either, because they just love to crack and suffer corrosion. Montgomery, for example, had a minor collision with a tug in early October 2016, cracking a weld seam, and a couple of weeks later, she struck a lock in the Panama Canal, opening up an 18-inch crack. Independence herself was found to have severe galvanic corrosion around all 4 water jet channels in February 2011, and if you recall, she was only commissioned in 2010.
Yikes.
1 year. And just in case all of that wasn't bad enough,
I have to look up galvanic corrosion. I'm not familiar with this. An electrochemical process which one metal corrodes preferentially when it is in an electrical contact with another different metal. I'm reading the Wikipedia on that. So it's electrical corrosion. That's interesting. I learned a thing today.
those mission modules, the supposed heart of the whole LCS concept that was meant to shrink the vessels down while compromising none of their capabilities? Well, color us surprised, but it turns out they weren't all that either, being both over budget and underwhelming. The anti-submarine warfare package, for example, arguably the most important of the lot, envisioned to put the willies up Chinese submarines, as it were, well, it never materialized. First, it was just an unmanned sonar drone aspect of it that was cancelled. That was in 2016, after hundreds of millions of dollars in R&D had already been sunk into it. And then in 2021, the whole module was cancelled. As USNI News dryly put it, the LCS will never perform the ASW mission.
But they were cool taking that money for as long as they could.
Then there's the mine warfare modules. It had been intended to replace the Navy's 1980s vintage Avenger-class minesweepers, and in the end, it didn't. It relied on the remote mine hunting system centered on the 23-foot unmanned submersible WLD-1, but the Director, Operational Test and Evaluation, the Pentagon's testing office, found it so unreliable that the Navy cancelled it outright. A replacement, the Knifefish drone, only limped to initial operation capability in 2023. That's a decade late, by the way. In the meantime, as the Government Accountability Office noted in a 2022 report, the fleet's mine countermeasure gap simply went unfilled. The surface warfare package was the least disastrous, but that is a very, very low bar. It bolted on a pair of 30mm guns to supplement the built-in 57mm guns, plus a short-range Hellfire missile launcher to swat swarming speedboats. Useful in a fight with Iranian Revolutionary Guard skiffs, and, well, that's about it. Although, to be fair, that's all it had been intended to deal with. A long-range missile system, Netfires, had been intended to give some heavier punch, but that was cancelled in 2010. Only in 2019 did the package finally get Raytheon's Naval Strike Missile, finally giving it over-the-horizon capabilities. Now, we could go on, but you get the idea. Taken together, the LCS was a tale of two designs and a single conclusion. Neither could deliver.
So, chat does clarify, in regards to the corrosions, why ship propellers are zinc-coated, not electrical dissimilar metals. Ticonderoga, which I served on, suffer the same issues between the aluminum superstructure and steel hulls. I mean, that's fascinating. I mean, that's all just chemistry, right? And I feel that that ends up being an oversight for all intents and purposes, right? Like that is an oversight in the R&D phase. So, I mean, I guarantee you they're not making that mistake again, but I mean, they got a decent payday out of this, right? They got a decent payday out of it. Basically, when two metals are in contact with each other, one metal will take all the corrosion for both metals. Most modern ships actually have galvanized corrosion pods to direct the corrosion to a replaceable device, mostly on cargo ships. I'm learning a thing today. This is fascinating to me. This is why I watch his videos.
The politics.
Oh, no. Dear God.
All right, so we skimmed the political aspect of the LCS disaster earlier when we were discussing the build, but let's come back and look at it in a bit more depth, because actually there's way more going on in that regard than just one Alabama senator complicating things while trying to secure manufacturing jobs for his constituents. The loudest voice in Washington backing the whole scheme was Ray Mabus, Secretary of the Navy from 2009 to 2016. Mabus didn't just support the LCS, he championed it with a kind of evangelical zeal. He wanted numbers, a fleet that looked impressive on paper. Quantity has a quality all its own, was the mantra, and Mabus made sure to keep the littorals rolling down the slipways accordingly. He also waved off critics as nothing more than the Alumni Association.
Bro, you're just haters. Come on now. What do you mean you don't like this project? Are you anti-American? You just a hater? Come on now. You want a big Navy, big strong Navy, don't you? Oh my God, bro. We see this in 2025, right? Not with politics necessarily, but people. Oh, you think what I'm doing is bad? Well, I mean, you're just a hater. Come on now. You don't want to be a hater, do you? Bro. This man is silly.
I.e. a bunch of old admirals who never liked anything new and were just incredibly stuck in their ways. At the christening of the Jackson in 2011, he even thundered that the LCS was, quote, a drug runner's worst nightmare, a submarine's worst nightmare, anyone who wants to do harm to the United States' worst nightmare. And while, sure, the true scale of the problems had yet to truly manifest, by that point, there was happily enough issues looking at you, corroded independences, to discourage the making of such bold and brash statements. Inside the Navy, however, the mood was far darker. Far from having their heads shoved firmly up their backsides, as Mr. Mabus posited, the big hats were actually well aware of the issues. Rear Admiral Sam Perez, for example, wrote a classified memo in 2012 that tore the whole concept to shreds. The ships were too lightly armed, their crews overstretched, and the vaunted plug-and-play modules were just a logistical fantasy. His end conclusion was damning. The LCS could only realistically fight, quote, lightly armed, small, fast attack boats.
This man absolutely tore it to shreds. What a legend. Oh my God.
Against pirates, maybe, but useless in a proper shooting war. The report never saw daylight, At least immediately, obviously. Or how else are we talking about it today?
Right.
And for his honesty, Perez was moved sideways into a diplomatic job, and his criticisms were buried. He wasn't alone either. In 2013, Rear Admiral Tom Copeman produced a memo recommending that the Navy cap LCS production and get back to buying more survivable combatants. When it leaked, Abrams' office went on the offensive. Copeman, like Perez, soon found himself pushed aside, which for him took the form of early retirement. And
See, when I opened this video and, military brass and learning, never. That'll never happen. This is what I'm referring to. Oh, you're bringing a well thought out argument on why this is a dumb idea? Nah, you're getting promoted sideways, my guy. Oh, you, sir, you should think about retirement. Bro. Like, I laugh, but it's one of those things where, like, being in the Navy and, like, actively dealing with this and actively being on these ships must be an incredibly frustrating experience. Like, it's so FUBAR.
And there's Lockheed Martin and Austral's role too, because they were very proactive in selling the merits of the LCS to the politicians. They spent millions lobbying Congress directly, making sure the LCS brand was always wrapped in stars and stripes. Washington metro stations were even plastered with glossy ads about the transformational little ships. Local newspapers in Alabama and Wisconsin dutifully ran stories about jobs created and families fed. Some people would call this corruption. Definitely not us.
No, definitely not.
Lockheed Martin's legal department terrifies us. And
oh, absolutely. I mean, absolutely. I would never say anything against, Lockheed Martin, whatever the other company is. I honestly don't remember the name, if I'm being completely honest. Obviously for legal standpoints, definitely, you are doing absolutely everything you need to. All of your work is exquisite. 10 out of 10 works. No flaws will ever be found with your work. No, sir. None at all. Absolutely none.
As a result, we think they're fantastic.
For safety, other views exist, allegedly. Please don't. We have Oh, yeah, and absolutely, you too should definitely, make sure to go ahead and support Lockheed Martin and any other military contractor, because definitely not supporting them might open you up to legal action, allegedly, potentially, and no one would want to make sure to stress them out in those capacities. No, sir, definitely not.
They're fantastic and have done literally nothing wrong ever.
Exactly, right? Their service record is spotless. I fail to see a single time Lockheed Martin has ever done anything that is not an 11 out of 10.
Love you guys. That said, by the mid-2010s, the LCS didn't need to be actually seaworthy. It only needed to be politically seaworthy. It would take years before the prevailing attitude would sour, and oh boy, did it certainly sour. The retreat. When the first LCSs were delivered, they were meant to serve for 25 years. In reality, some didn't even make it to 10, because by the early 2020s, the Navy quietly admitted what many of its officers already knew and had been arguing for years. The LCS in either class simply could not fight and win in a near-peer war. With that admitted, the only thing left to decide was how quickly to cut its losses. And it turns out that was pretty much immediately. Retrenchment began in 2021 when the Navy decommissioned both Freedom and Independence. Once hyped as the harbingers of a revolution, they were now cast aside and discarded after a mere 13 and 11 years of service, respectively. Not that they were scrapped, though. No. Instead, they were moved to the Reserve Fleet, a collection of ships that has the top secret stuff and particularly perishable systems stripped out and are kept in a preserved state so that they can be reactivated if the geopolitical situation suddenly turns a bit scary.
Okay.
They weren't the only two either, as in 2022, the Navy stunned lawmakers by proposing to retire 9 more Freedom classes, some of which were barely even half a decade old. The reasoning was blunt. As Admiral Gilday told Congress, fixing the class-wide combining gear defect, which we saw him discussing earlier, was simply not cost-effective. In other words, building new stuff that actually works would be cheaper than bringing the Freedoms up to par.
Wouldn't that be at cost to the contract or to the contractor, though? Like, if they sold you a thing and they allegedly knew that a defect existed, shouldn't that be in the contract that fixing what they promised would be at cost to someone like Lockheed Martin or any other military contractor? Why would that be at cost to the U.S. government? And I guess maybe that's them saying it's at cost to the contractor and thus just make new ship 5-head? Depending on the contract wording. I mean, that's entirely possible, right? the contract wording might not have it at cost, which feels like an oversight. Because what happens if I, as Kip, decide to pitch, I don't know, some kind of drone warfare thing to the U.S. government, and the U.S. government hands me a bunch of money, and then I give them, I don't know, like glues and like glue, gum, and sticks put together and call it a drone, right? And there's like an actual issue with the design. Shouldn't that be at cost to me for giving a product that wasn't what I promised or to the best of my ability? Not saying that Lockheed Martin or any other military contractor has ever done anything like that or ever done anything that isn't exemplary. Absolutely not. Just from a, like, if I were to pitch something and I were to know that there is a flaw, even if I didn't know there was a flaw, but a flaw was discovered, wouldn't that be from a common sense standpoint, at cost to me to rectify and deliver on what I promised and was contracted for?
Frankness, however, didn't spare the Navy a grilling. In a now famous Armed Services Committee session, Representative Jackie Spire held up a graphic showing the LCS fleet overlaid with bright yellow lemons. Quoting her, "We have a fleet of lemon LCS ships. We have spent billions of dollars on this fleet when they have no capability to help us deal with what our largest threat is, which is that of China and Russia. The only winners have been the contractors on which the Navy relies for sustaining these ships."
Yeah.
End quote. Still though, despite the many issues that were now out in the open and being discussed, some hesitated, with some members of Congress in particular arguing that the ships could still be useful in lower threat theaters, pointing to missions like counter-narcotics patrols in the Caribbean, where, as an example, Sioux City had intercepted $500 million worth of drugs during operations with the Fourth Fleet. Some also suggested transferring the hulls to allies. Latin American navies, they argued, might welcome a ship with a big flight deck and a decent gun, even if the modules never worked. As Ronald O'Rourke pointed out in his 2019 report, foreign sales had always been floated as a way to soften the program's excesses from its very inception. There was some good rationale behind this notion too. To be fair, Saudi Arabia bought 4 multi-mission surface combatants, an export derivative of the Independence class in 2022 for some reason, so clearly there was some degree of foreign interest. Such notions were never going to save the LCSs though, because fundamentally the Navy wanted them gone, and increasingly with bad press just stacking up, they increasingly found political allies willing to aid them in delivering the coup de grace. As a result, today, as of the time of writing, 7 of the fleet of 35, 20% of the whole lot, has been decommissioned.
Wow.
And don't forget, there are new vessels still to be commissioned. And if you're wondering when the end will come, the LCSs will probably hang on in there in a much more diminished form until the 2040s. The Navy just wants the freedoms gone, especially the earlier hulls, because, touch wood, it does appear as though from Minneapolis-St. Paul, the 11th unit built, they have finally fixed the combining gear issues. The 11th units, guys. Jesus Christ. There's nothing...
Guys, it's fine. I won't yap for the majority of the video, 300 videos in. It only took me 300 videos to not talk over the entire video. Guys, the game gets good after you play it for 600 hours. I promise. Yeah, you have to spend 600 hours drudging through garbage. But you know what? After 600 hours, it's great. It's fine. It's amazing. Yeah, so when are we getting that Lockheed Martin battle pass, okay? You have to drive a certain amount of, drive, swim, whatever boats do. You have to travel a certain amount of nautical miles, and you have to expend so many rounds to level up your battle pass. And once you get to the final battle pass tier, they take a page out of GM where you get the heated seats feature as a reward. Oh my God, please. No, please no. Please don't. It shouldn't be funny, but it's really funny. You only get the advanced radar capabilities if you clear the Season 2 Battle Pass.
Set in stone, but analysts seem pretty unanimous in saying that those sorted freedoms could reasonably stay in service until the mid to late 2030s. And that, as you've likely deduced, means that it'll be the Independence that hangs around into the 2040s. In no small part, this is because the Navy is tying them into their new mine countermeasures mission, which hit initial operating capability in 2023 and began deploying in 2025, and that operational need is a strong incentive to retain a core of them ships through the 2030s and possibly into the 2040s. Consistent with that, the Congressional Budget Officer's read of the Navy's latest 30-year plan shows the fleet holding around 25 LCSs, mostly Independents in service until about 2041, then declining as retirements begin, a trajectory that matches the nominal life of type while still leaving room for earlier cuts if costs or priorities shift. Basically, expect the properly shit comedy ones that struggle to go 5 minutes without breaking to go in the next few years, and those that stand up to snuff will probably see out their full service life. The shit
Makes sense.
that the Navy doesn't want being crammed into a role that it can fill with its incredibly oversold spec sheet.
So Raven does clarify in chat, if the contract said it needs to be remotely piloted and your submission of sticks and gum could be remotely piloted, quote unquote, then that's not on you. And at that point, we worry about the legal nitty gritty of that. Tesla have a subscription-based cruise control. Don't tempt skunk works. Okay. All I'm saying, okay, Boeing gonna have the Faraday cage that isn't there a Faraday cage around the pot? No, they're gonna have the battle pass that makes sure doors don't open. Right, that you have to unlock. You have to go through the Boeing battle pass by getting so many miles under your belt to where you can actually make certain buttons work and stuff. Right, and doors won't open unnecessarily. Not that any doors or anything has ever been wrong with the Boeing aircraft. No, sir, definitely not. Bro, I hate this.
And frankly, given the issues the LCS program had, that would not exactly be a dishonorable end to its story.
Which is fair.
So what's next after all this? Not another miracle fix or PowerPoint fantasy, that's for sure. It's going to be a proper, boring, old-school warship that actually does the job. The Constellation class. So careful are they, being in fact, that the Constellation isn't even a fresh-from-the-keel-up design, instead being based on the Franco-Italian FREM design, which is currently serving quite happily with the Italian, French, Moroccan, and Egyptian navies, with Indonesia and Greece also being slated to get some soon enough. To cut a long story short, the US plans to take that proven hull and harden it to better suit their own needs. Heavier scantlings and shock survivability margins, an Aegis-derived combat system, Combat's 21, rather than something bespoke, and the SPY-6 V3 Enterprise air surveillance radar to tie it cleanly into the wider fleet picture. Weapons, similarly, are sensible and sufficient. 32 Mark 41 vertical launch system cells for SM-2 and RAM-162 type missions, 16 canister launch naval strike missiles for the over-the-horizon punch, a 57mm Mark 110 gun up front, plus a RAM-116 rolling airframe missile system for close-in defense. The Constellations will be getting a US-specific power plant too, a single General Electric LM2500 gas turbine.
I'm thinking of General Motors. Never mind. GE, GM, different. I was about to say, I don't know, because of how GM has ran their cars for the past however many years, right? That's beside the point, though. I don't know. I mean, it depends if it performs, right? I mean, it's got a big name behind it. So ideally, it functions the way it's supposed to. And ideally, there's not any right to repair shenanigans going on with it. So that way, if you're actually out doing things, you're doing your job, you can actively do your job. I don't know, maybe you need the GE Battle Pass to get the max wattage out of it. I don't know.
For performance, expect 26 knots in a sprint and a 6,000 nautical mile endurance at 16 knots. As for how many and when, the plan is deliberately incremental. The Navy began buying in the 2020 financial year, and come 2024, 6 ships were funded. All in all, as the time of writing, they're hoping for 20 when all is said and done. And that is the proper end of the LCS saga. Not absolution, but circumvention. The Navy is swapping a clever idea that never quite worked for a normal frigate that almost certainly will. Thank you for watching.
What a shit show. I feel sorry to anyone in the Navy who had to work on one of these. Like, whoa. What a wild sequence of events. That's not happening. It was canceled because it went from a 8515 similar to proven design to an 8515 new shite that needs testing. I don't know, man. Getting struck with drones and getting out. If you need to use CIWS, you have had so many failures of defense. You may as well go up to people man up in the 50s, bro. What a wild sequence of events. I have no other words for it than what a wild sequence of events. Definitely making sure to clarify that Lockheed Martin and any other military contractor have absolutely done nothing wrong. They put out exemplary products, right? And it would definitely be not in anyone's best interest to even so remotely criticize them for it. Just making sure to clarify for the lawyers that are going to be watching this. Well, I enjoyed this. Thank you, Simon and Co. for another amazing video. Definitely go check out Megaprojects if this is something that is your fancy. I thoroughly enjoy this. Hopefully, you enjoy this as well, dear viewer. Definitely go check out Simon and any number of his wonderful Factboy channels. I will see you all in the next one.